I wanted Michael to talk about Leader Technologies here a bit, something that people can't even get their heads around because it's so big. What happened with your creation, really, of the source code for scalable social network systems?
Yeah, so I rebuilt AT&T's email system in the mid-90s, just as Windows 95 was coming on board. And this was prior to the browser wars between Netscape and Microsoft. And so in the process of building this email system, I supported all of AT&T's internal email as well as all their key clients. But in the process, I observed a huge Achilles heel of the emerging internet. And having been an entrepreneur long enough to realize that there's a lot of people out there trying to steal your ideas, I decided to organize a business in 97. I started it, called it Leader Technologies, and we literally went underground, told nobody what we were doing. I hired some of the brightest engineers on the planet at the time. I put a team together and we raised money, all private equity, no venture capital, individual investors. And I put them in a room and literally I said, we're not coming out of here until we figure out how communications can be scalable in this new thing called the internet. We spent almost 3 years looking at the technical problem, and we had a magic aha moment at the end of 1999, right before the year 2000. And I knew, and everyone knew immediately, that we had a tiger by the tail, and nobody in the market was thinking this way. Not IBM, Microsoft, Novell, nobody was thinking this way. So I made a beeline to Washington and looked for the best patent attorney that I could find. And I was introduced to a professor, James P. Chandler, and he actually immediately agreed to come on our board. But what we found out later, many years later, is that he was the chief intellectual property counsel essentially for the Pilgrim Society.
So it's predictable what happens from there, right? And wasn't he also on like the National Security Council? Or?
Oh yeah, when I say Pilgrim Society, I'm talking about DARPA, I'm talking about the Highlands Group, which is involved with In-Q-Tel, the CIA. They were getting everything organized. And so that was the group that he was also advising, and he was also IBM's chief intellectual property attorney. And so what we have now discovered is that he, in 2001, developed an organization with IBM called the IBM Eclipse Foundation. He was able to obtain a copy of our source code as our intellectual property attorney in July of 2002. And by the fall of 2002, they had implemented all of our inventions in the IBM Eclipse Foundation source code. In the meantime, they had been inviting all of the players in Silicon Valley and in tech around the world to join. And then they magically gave away this source code as open source. Now, if anybody knows IBM, they know IBM doesn't open source anything. They're the largest patent holder on the planet, and yet they gave away our code as open source. And that today is called the Eclipse IDE for any of you in development. That Eclipse development tool, that technology is our invention, and there was a lot of pressure on me to just give up, go away, and be quiet. And that's just not who I am. So I started digging to try to figure out who had done this to us. And now we are here today looking at that same group of people trying to take down the entire American Republic.
So that's an incredible story. I mean, it's so important for people to understand how large of a story that is, to have your intellectual property stolen, and then, you know, open source, but basically given through intelligence and intelligence money and foreign money to create all these companies that would then dominate and take over the world.
Including Chinese universities, by the way.
Now, you did put a giant lien against the United States, right, to contest this whole stealing?
Yeah, we put what essentially is a lien, it's called the Miller Act notice, to the executive branch, which is the branch that organized this stuff. And we've basically said we want paid. I want my shareholders paid for the risk they took and the theft of this by the federal government, which was in the end what we're talking about. what we have been working on, thanks to a lot of people, including the conclave at American Intelligence Media, is working to educate people on this story and get this awareness into influential leaders' hands so that when the time was right, the payment would be made. And in addition, my shareholders got together and they said, well, how can we help solve this problem? And so one of the things that I credit my shareholders with doing is coming up with a plan that where, along with me, we would take the bulk of the payment that would be due us, and we would plow that into developing a truly free press.
Mike, I just don't want to skip over how this solves our social media, Twitter, YouTube, Google problem. Because what we would do is, since Leader Technologies is the original source for this technology, we would license it to the executive office. It would be really coming from we the people, giving the executive office the legal authority to be able then to secondary license it. Mm-hmm. And then when they step up, when Zuckerberg steps up to get his license to use this, which his whole platform runs on, he'll have to sign off on our user agreement, which says you're not going to mess up on the Constitution and the Bill of Rights.